people of the internet. My name is DargonEvo, and today we are checking out a double review on the atomic and non-atomic variant of the 2019 NECA Godzilla from the King of the Monsters film. But we're going to talk about how well these guys have held up over the years, for them being 6 years old going on 7. We're going to go over their paint, their articulation, and sculpt, a little bit of a size comparison, and we'll give y'all a final verdict if these guys are worth your time. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Y'all can already tell from the footage on screen that yes, you're able to use the atomic variant's breath on the non-atomic variant. Their tongue, which is what it slots into, is exactly the same, so you don't have to worry about that, which honestly, I think this figure looks absolutely stunning with the other's effect part. So firstly, delving into his sculpt, we'll start with his head. We can get a good look at that highly detailed mold. I've seen him memed online next to a Haya figure. I thought it was the goofiest thing. I could have sworn he was a bootleg because this guy is painted magnificently. I can get a good look at all that mouth detail. I'd almost swear this was a repaint. And with a mixture of that tan highlight on that grayscale, y'all can get a good look at all that lovely detail, which it doesn't look airbrushed on, as we'll get on to the other figure here soon enough. Their paint is their most notable difference. And then glassing over his plates, you can see how lovely NECA had painted these. I almost find it a little mesmerizing to just stare into them. And they also have that tan highlight little coated on the tops of them. So lovely indeed. And then running down to his tail, we have a pretty solid color with a little bit of that tan highlight on his spines running down to the tip of his tail, which it's nice to see that they didn't cheap out even on his rubber section of his tail. And bringing y'all a little close for his underbelly, we can see that he's got a nice undercoat of some two-toned, which runs down all the way through his tail, which is very nice to see. And then we can see, as for the difference from the 2014 variant, he doesn't have that gradient shading within the black and the tan. It's a little more all mixed in, but we have some amazing molded detail on those scales. And I'll point out that his toes in particular are very nice. He's got a little bit of wear and tear because this is a secondhand figure, but even looking at his hands, he has some very nice fingernail detail, I will note. Really, holding these guys side by side is very aesthetically pleasing. I think the shift in design from the 2014 to the 2019 is quite harsh, but I have love for both of these designs. Each one of these guys has their own flair of personality, which really made it a must for me to collect these a long time ago. Now moving on to the Atomic Godzilla's paint and sculpt, we're gonna practically see the same exact sculpt, except maybe his spines are formed just slightly different, but I think that's because mine are a little warped. But I'll say his paint is nonetheless magnificent. Getting a closer look, you can see even down to his pupils are painted with a nice metallic silver. We have a nice cyan covering the top of his fins, mimicking the atomic glow from his heat ray, and that's the one that is compatible with the other Monsterverse Godzillas we have. But once again, starting off with his head, we can see that he has some nice shading through his scales. And unlike the SH Monster Arts Atomic Godzilla, I like that he doesn't have an overwhelming amount of blue on his mouth. So even without his effect, he looks pretty dope. And moving down a bit, we can see that it looks like a light navy blue metallic, and then he has a silver metallic spread out through there as a complementary color. But with that blue dripping through his scales, it really looks like the atomic power is coursing through his veins. Now, it looks like they actually molded this figure in a black, unlike the 2019 boy over here, who looks like he is over here molded in a slightly lighter color of gray. And getting a good look at his spines, we can see where his plates are glued in, but it's not very apparent. Doesn't bother me whatsoever. We can see a light airbrushed metallic running down the sides of his tail, which really highlights his glow. But other than that, he's pretty much exactly the same as the other 2019 we just showed off. And before I forget, let's look down his belly. We can see some lovely blue bleeding through his scales once more, with some metallic painted on his chest. Even his hands got the little TLC of that metallic touch. His arms look very nice. This is definitely one of my favorite NECA figures in terms of detail. Now diving into the only accessory that comes with the atomic variant of NECA Godzilla, regular one that comes with this beam effect, unless it's the bootleg, we have this beautifully molded piece that we've been showing off this entire time. Now, for the most part, since his jaw's kind of gotten loose over the years, for certain poses, and specifically the downward looking poses where his beam could just fall out of his mouth from the sheer force of gravity, his effect piece actually kind of holds it up in there whenever it's feeling a little loose. And I do love the fact that you can use this with any of the MonsterVerse Godzilla NECA figures, despite the fact that this guy's not blue. That really makes me wish we got an atomic variant of the 2014 Godzilla. One of these companies has to make us one. So considering that he is 5 years old and I'm the second owner, their joints feel exactly the same, if not just barely loose since being stripped from their packaging. I think the quality of these figures truly stands out among the crowd for having set a legacy for Godzilla figures. I think someone should have these in their collection solely for the mark on history that NECA has put. And you can still find this guy sometimes on aftermarket for going for about 50 to 60 bucks, which I think he is well worth it. If you snagged him back when he was only $25, then congratulations, because this guy was well ahead of his time. All of his joints are definitely tight enough to at least hold all of his poses, including the beam effect that we already showed, which shows just how tight his jaw kind of is. I'm sure if you mess with that long enough with the beam, it may get loose over time, but still, grade A quality. Now moving on to articulation. This guy is pretty dang similar to this guy right here that we checked out a few weeks ago. And this guy is identical to this guy right here. So diving into articulation though, you can get some nice hinge action from his jaw, which like I previously showed, you can use his beam effect with, that comes with this guy. And you can get some nice rotation out of that head, getting pretty much any angle you would want. You can even look up to some degree, more like straight forward, but he can kind of look down. But with his neck, you're kind of limited to 360 degrees, which is not much of a limitation, but you're not going to be able to bring that down or anything. And then you're going to have a similar joint for his waist, which is going to allow some simple rotation, which does let you get some flexibility out of him. And then his tail is made of out of 9 segments, which doesn't really bend down, but you can get some nice other angles out of this guy. And moving on to his limbs, his legs are identical to the 2014 Godzilla, made out of 3 segments. You get your hip, your lower leg segment, and then your foot. Though I'll note that you can swing his legs out, allowing you to get some very slick footwork into your poses. Now moving on to his arms, they are once again pretty identical to the 2014 Godzilla, being a socket of sorts. He's got a hinge peg for his bicep into his forearm, and then he has another peg and hinge for his wrist, allowing him to get some broken wrist action. I feel like we don't need a size comparison, but I'm going to give y'all one anyways. Here's Mr. 2019 next to the 2003 Godzilla from Godzilla Tokyo SOS, which this has to be one of my favorite figures I own. Here he is again against a 1999 Movie Monster Series Orga figure. And here you can see him against Godzilla Ultima from Godzilla Singular Point, coming from the SH Monster Arts line, which you can check out our previous review on, up in the right hand corner. And next to a 1/44 scale high grade from the Gundam Witch for Mercury. So he stands in at about 6.5 inches. I do not have a ruler on hand, but that would be a fun addition to our reviews. But if you enjoyed yourself up to this point, why not check out our other reviews down in the description. A like's always appreciated. My name is DargonEvo, and as always, have an amazing day.